Welcome to the Kriya Yoga Podcast, a source of inspiration and actionable education for those inspired towards the goal of enlightenment through yogic meditation. Through these interviews, discussions, and reflections, it is my intention to share the possibility of waking up to the reality of self and God realization, and to remind you of the immortal words of Paramahansa Yogananda. Don't look back. Don't look to the left or to the right. Look straight ahead to the goal and go all the way in this lifetime. I'm Ryan Kurzak, and I'll be your host on this adventure of spiritual self-discovery. And this is why it's very important to just know how the world is. The biggest obstacle I think yogis have is they expect the world to eventually become ideal. It's not ever going to become ideal because we need this world and its light and its dark. We need our family members who die of cancer. We need our wars. We need the people that we don't like. We need the situation where we're not perfect to teach us where perfection actually comes from, where longevity comes from, where the source of happiness comes from, right? Ramana Maharshi, actually by Yogananda, was asked one time, so Yogananda asked Ramana Maharshi, why does God permit suffering in the world? Yogananda is asking Ramana Maharshi this. And Ramana Maharshi simply says, it's the way. And Yogananda persists and says, yeah, but if God is so powerful and he could just do away with suffering with a wave of his hand, and Ramana Maharshi persists. He says, it's the way. And finally, Yogananda persists, and finally, Ramana Maharshi just sits there. Because obviously you can't answer that question, right? But I've wondered about that and thought about it quite a bit. And again, it comes back to what we talked about yesterday when I brought up that idea of original sin, right? Again, I'm not talking about in the Catholic way that really irritates a lot of people. I'm talking about just the idea of it, that we exist in this world the way it is right now because there is a seed desire within us that can only be fulfilled here. And part of the process of yoga is to burn up those seeds of karma so we don't have to come back here yet again, right? The Buddhists who say you keep coming back until everyone is enlightened, you're going to keep coming back forever, right? And we don't want to go to an extreme to where we're trying to escape. I don't mean to encourage escapism, but you need to do your duty. You need to clean up your mess. And then you can go outside and play, right? That's the way we need to look at it. So it's not stay in your room with this mess until all rooms in the world are cleaned up. Then all children can go out and play. No, it's clean up your room. And you'll be able to exist in this angelic state or a state of clarity, which is freer than the material. So you go from the gross here, and you transcend that. Well, now you're in the astral and causal realms. You still have stuff to work out. It's not going to be quite as painful, but it will still be painful. And that's why in the Yoga Sutras it says, to the yogi, all is but pain. And the reason it says that, again, is not to push you into a state of despair and say, what's the point? It's saying that anytime you identify with anything in creation, there is a potential for pain because creation is always changing. And that's why there is this emphasis to experience directly soul, spirit, pure awareness without defining yourself through prakriti, ever-changing nature. Now, if this is too much for you and it seems a little ridiculous, I get it. Don't worry about it right now then. Just keep doing your pranayama, keep studying the Bhagavad Gita, keep coming to retreats like this. And in time, what happens is that tamas, that heaviness, that ignorance that makes you think that, all this stuff is so important, it starts to shake itself off. And then you start to catch glimpses, and you read Ramana Maharshi or Paramahansa Yogananda, in his later years when he was more of an absolutist, and you start to see what they're talking about. But in order to do this, you have to have an initial sense that it is true. I mean, you all are here to study spirituality, to grow spiritually speaking, which means even if you don't agree with a lot of stuff that you read in some of these books or anything that I'm saying, it means that there is a part of you that knows that it is true. And you have to work at the level that you're at. And that might mean that you're spending your days perfecting your pranayama practice. It might mean that you're not even doing pranayama, that you're spending your days perfecting your asana practice, your ability to be comfortable within your body and so on. Or it might mean that you're simply spending your days perfecting your capacity to practice ahimsa or harmlessness. And that's a beautiful one. As I mentioned, you have to celebrate your successes. And so yesterday I talked about ahimsa. Yesterday, I did not eat any animals. So at the end of the day, I thought to myself, great, I did it. And that gave me a little boost. One day, I succeeded in not doing that. There was a time when I had to practice truthfulness, and I had to kind of keep track. Today, I only told 20 lies, right? Hey, it's better than the 40 I told last year, right? 40 a day. And so you keep track of that, and you're not doing it again to like beat yourself up or have that type A perfectionist personality. Oh, I need to do it right. It's more of just, you know what? Today, can I tell 19 lies? Today, can I tell 10? Until eventually you get to the point to where you're not telling any lies. And then every day you celebrate the fact that this was a day of truthfulness for you. And that brings more light into your awareness, that lifts you up. And then maybe you tell a lie one day and you say, well, okay, tomorrow I'm not going to do that again. So when you look at the yamas and niyamas, maybe one of the most important transformational things you can do as a part of your bhakti, your devotion, because you see, that is how you practice devotion to God, right? By following the yamas and the niyamas. You keep track of that. And as you keep track of it, eventually you realize, wow, I did not steal anything today. You know, non-stealing is one of the yamas and niyamas. And by non-stealing, I don't mean, going to the store and swiping a watch. I mean taking something from you that's not yours, right? Or contentment is one of the most important ones of them all. How many of you can say that yesterday you were content all day long? Anyone? Well, good. Yes, the Swami should say that. So good job. Okay, well, so you weren't content all day yesterday. No big deal. But you need to bring your awareness to that fact. And then in this moment, let's just start with right now. In this moment, how many of you right now have a reason right now to not be content? Really? Okay. Are any of you willing to talk about it? If you're not, that's fine. I get it. It's personal. Okay. Okay. Fire away.
I have a pain in my shoulder.
Okay. So that makes you uncontent. It's because you wish it wasn't there. Okay. So that's a perfect opportunity. All right. And so you can ask yourself, well, how can I work through that? And I don't have any techniques for that, but I'll tell you what I do. I remember when I have an ache or a pain, I remember the time that I couldn't walk for 6 months. And sometimes when I get an ache or a pain, I think, well, at least I can walk across, the grocery store. Or if I'm sick or I'm unwell and something's not going right, I remember other people who aren't going to be very well in a few days. And so in a way, I kind of talk through that in my mind. And I think to myself, if other individuals who are suffering, if they could be content right now with what I have, wouldn't they choose that? Right? And so that's like a mental game that I play personally. Another thing when it comes to maybe pains in the body is the practice of, as I mentioned, looking at it non-judgmentally, just looking at it as a sensation, right? When I've had health issues and I couldn't get through them, nothing was correcting them. What would I do is I would just be with it and feel it purely without the label good or bad. And in a sense, it's like surrendering to it. And part of the yogic process is going beyond the choice. I like this, I don't like that. And this is what's beautiful about the whole thing when we get to some of the subtler parts of it is when you move into what's called like, so samadhi means oneness. It's the state we're aiming for in meditation. You think of it as wholeness and so on. Well, there is a state of samadhi which is related to Ananda, which we translate as bliss. And when we think of bliss, what do we think of? Anyone? Joy. Okay, we think of pleasure, right? We think of, what's that? Blissed out. That's what we think of as bliss. But at this state for the yogi, it's just pure feeling, right? Because, I mean, I don't know anyone personally, but you know there are people in the world where they masochists that like love pain. Like you hurt them and it feels good to them. They exist, right? You can get up there and give them a little, twist and pinch them, right? And they'll just really do something for them. Or you smack them with a whip, they get off on it. Well, there are people that really, that is pain. If that happened to us, what would we do? Right? There are people, well, how would you feel if someone said, go sit in a tub of freezing water? How many would enjoy that experience? Well, I'm raising my hand because I do enjoy that experience. And how did I learn to enjoy that experience? I got in the freezing water and I relaxed and I let it wash over me. And I realized that is just sensation. Now, in the beginning, oh my God, I didn't want to do that at all. Jasmine saw the first time I did it, I cried. I got out, I was still crying, right? And I learned that when I woke up in the morning, that if I just didn't think about it, and I just put on my little slippers and my swim trunks, and I just jumped in that tub, had to break the ice up first, and jumped in that tub and got in it, didn't even think about it, and I just relaxed. It became supremely joyful. So that is an example of how the things that we feel are dependent on how we judge them. And when a yogi experiences what is actually Ananda, it is not blissed out like you're on drugs, right? It is the ability to let whatever perception, whatever feeling roll through you, which can be utter sorrow. It can be deep despair. It can be anger. It can be joy. It can be happiness. But it's the letting of the feeling roll through you without you identifying it as something bad. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is a level of Ananda Samadhi, and it's not what you think it is. Because if you're hoping it's going to be this blissed out feeling all the time, you're never going to get there. Because you're hoping it's going to be something that it's actually not. So anyway, back to the point with the discomfort for physical things. Part of the practice could be just simply, and again, this takes time. It's not easy. You have to figure it out for yourself. How can I surrender into the pain? How can I surrender into the discomfort? Now, don't take this too far. I don't mean that you put yourself in painful situations. I don't mean that like if a bee is stinging you, you don't try to remove the bee. I mean, if something's going on and nothing's going to change it in that moment, to practice contentment, this moment is being presented to you to give you that opportunity. And this comes back to what I said yesterday. Prakriti, nature, everything that happens in existence happens for the sake of your illumination. In the Samkhya Karika, it states that everything that happens within nature exists solely for your individual illumination. That's why you have the specific experiences you have. I have the specific experiences I have. They're different because that is what you need as an individual expression of this infinite consciousness to wake up. The good, the bad, all those things, right? That's what you need as an individual. And devotion, bhakti, when it's possible for you, is whenever something happens, you say thank you. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, I don't mean the kind of gratitude where you've been withheld something and tortured and finally someone gives you a cup of water. I mean, it's an acknowledgement of, oh, this is actually for me. This is actually for my spiritual benefit. And it's not easy. And many of us go through very horrendous and difficult situations. And I can remember when this one teacher was talking about that. Well, if you don't feel it's a gift, you haven't made it to the end yet. Their nice little airy voice. And I thought, you know what? As I was going through very difficult time periods, I said, you can take that and you can stuff it somewhere. But it turned out as time went on that when I finally made it to the end of that experience, I absolutely thought that unbearable thing was a gift. And it happened so many times that now I have the conscious capacity that the moment something happens that is unthinkable, I know it's the beginning of a gift. And I let that experience roll through me, and I let that light of Sattva be there, because the light of Sattva, when I say light, many of us think of like the light of candles, like illumination, brightness of the sun. But on this subtle level that we're talking about yogically, Sattva is awareness, conscious attention and awareness. So, for example, if you're engaged in tamasic things or rajasic things, for example, let's say how we talked about, you get really fired up about political things. Okay, that's fine. That's rajasic, that's tamasic. Sometimes we need to be inspired to make changes. But if we let that dominate our awareness, then we remain stuck in ignorance. But if we have the conscious awareness to say, okay, I see where anger is arising, I see where I'm starting to get more tribal, as long as you maintain the capacity to be aware of what's going on inside of you, Sattva is still present. The same thing with like pain in the body or other situations. The moment the pain overtakes you, and that's all you are aware of, and you go into the sense of despair and difficulty, then you're being sucked down into tamas, heaviness, delusion. But if you can try to feel the pain, to feel the discomfort, and stay aware that I am the eternal spirit that feels this. I'm not the body. You don't ignore the body, but I'm not the body, and you don't let it ruin your state of mind. Sattva is still present. So you see, Sattva continuously exists no matter what's going on in the physical world, right? It's only when you lose your attention that you become sucked down into rajas and tamas. And you cannot experience illumination of consciousness when you are sucked down into rajas and tamas. It's impossible. I don't care, again, I don't care who you are. I don't care how well known the spiritual teacher is. If they say that you can, go and have sex with everybody and get drunk all the time and these kinds of things and still remain in a state of clarity, they're not telling you the truth. They are an Asura, which is great. I mentioned I became a little more fundamentalist as time goes on, but there was a story that Roy told. There was a spiritual teacher, and he was telling this to kind of not, to indicate that this is not the way to be. But he said there was a spiritual teacher who said, there are two kinds of people in the world. There are those who love Krishna, infinite consciousness or God, and there are demons. That's what he said. And he said, yeah, we don't quite want to go that route. But there's actually something to that statement. So the word Asura, I use that word Asura. That's translated as demon in Sanskrit, a loose, rough translation. And so we have the Devas, which are like the angelic beings, and we have the Asuras, which are the demonic beings. And by demonic, all we mean, not horns and head spinning and, spitting out curses, although that could be part of it. Demonic means anything which glorifies the physical creation. Because the Asuras are, what they want is for you to be successful in this life. And that's fine. There's no problem with that. But the angelic, the Devic energy, what they want is for you to be supremely free of it all. All right. So we have to remember, within this flow of creation, there are people who absolutely, their role in this life is simply to be successful here, to figure out how to navigate the physical world, how to be, an adult in this physical world. They're meant to build businesses, have families, and that is really their role. It's because in their transmigration, they're flowing from pure consciousness down into involvement with matter. That's fine. We are all here because of that. Okay, but there comes a point in time where you can't go down into matter anymore. And you've come down into matter so much that you're like, okay, I've had enough. And then you redirect the flow. And so, yes, you take care of things. The Asuras have their role to manage worldly things, but then you have to utilize them to flow back up into spirit, right? So that statement, there are two kinds of people, the lovers of Krishna, God, and then there are demons. Well, in a way, that's true. And when it comes to spiritual teachers, when a person is playing the role of a spiritual teacher, trying to encourage you to experience enlightenment, and they're getting you more involved with your senses, if they're trying to say find fulfillment through sensation and desire, they're an Asura. What they're trying to get you to do is just stay engaged in worldly things. And you'll do that for a while until eventually you'll see through it. And then you'll start to become more engaged in angelic or sattvic qualities of lightness. And you'll really start to feel that truth is important. You'll really start to feel that harmlessness is important. You'll really start to recognize that every time you gratify the senses, you're missing your first true love. You're missing spirit. And that takes some time. And we don't all believe that that's true because we haven't seen it yet, right? That's really the big issue a lot of people have, that they haven't seen it yet. We'll move on here. In the Yoga Sutras, there is a statement, Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna, Purvaka, Iteration. This translates to higher samadhi, or a higher state of oneness and clarity, realization of God, spirit, is preceded by faith, energy, memories of previous spiritual experiences, cognitive absorption, the ability to focus, keep your attention where you want it to be, and the revelation of inner knowledge. And the very first word in this higher samadhi is preceded by, remember, in this process, it's the first word in the list of things that are the most important. Well, in this statement, in order to experience higher samadhi, the very first quality is faith, Shraddha. And that's the sticking point, isn't it? Because in order to have faith, you either got to have a few things going on. You have to have experienced someone in your life that you love, that you trust, that you see who is successful, and you are safe around them, and you want to be like them, and you're willing to follow their example. Not many of us have that experience, right? Because of people who were raised by, our priests, our ministers, they do things that are questionable. And so we want to have faith, but we see things that make us think, wow, I mean, how can we do this? One of my friends, he's a Methodist minister, he would always say, the quickest way to lose your religion is to become friends with your priest. It's sometimes true. It's true on one level because if the person you're learning from is just a human being, which we all are, then you'll start to see, oh, they've got some stuff that they're working through. And rather than just recognize that they're actually working through it, they become disillusioned and say, well, they're not perfect, so therefore it must not work. And so they lose their religion. Or it might be that the person actually is a very good example for you, but you don't have the capacity to appreciate it, and you don't want to grow into what they're encouraging you to grow in. Many people say they want to have a teacher like Sri Yukteswar. How many of you have read Autobiography of a Yogi? Okay. How many of you wish you had a teacher like Sri Yukteswar? Okay. Okay. Let me change that. How many of you actually do wish you had a teacher like Sri Yukteswar, but you can't quite see yourself enduring his discipline? Anyone? Yeah. So that is an example of, that's one way that you can lose your religion too, by becoming too close to your spiritual preceptor. For me and Mr. Davis, for the first 10 years, I mimicked him. I would do whatever he wanted. When he said do this, I did that. When he was talking about something, I didn't question. I just listened. And I'm kind of still to this day that way. But I realized over time that I couldn't imitate him. I couldn't dress like him. I couldn't behave like him in the sense of imitating his mannerisms and so on. But because I was young and I thought that's what you were supposed to do, that's exactly what I did. And as time went on, I realized I had to express my own understanding of this. And so I do, but what I learned from him and his example is still the exact guiding light that I use. I didn't study with him and decide to alter what he said, right? I didn't make it fit my own agenda. And the reason that's the case is because, I met him when I was 20. What did I know when I was 20? I didn't know a whole lot, but I knew what was important. And so I studied with him. And I kept practicing. I kept doing what he said. And he would give me advice on certain things. And almost all the time I would take it. But there were maybe 2 or 3 things that I thought, well, he's just out of touch. He was quite a bit older than me, came from a different generation. Well, he's just out of touch. And so I wouldn't listen. And a few years would go by and I would see, oh, he was actually right. And then another thing would come up and say, well, he just doesn't understand my personal situation. Right? And I'd make excuses and I'd do it my own way. And sure enough, a few years later, I'm like, oh, yeah, he was right. And that happened enough that now, whenever I think about how to teach, what to do, I think about Mr. Davis. And if he wouldn't do it, if he wouldn't recommend it, I won't either. There's only so many people. There's only so many people that he spoke about as far as useful sources of information when it comes to the spiritual path. And I only read those things. And I don't recommend anyone else, right? Which maybe that's a little limiting. But the reason that's the case is because I know how accurate that information is. And when I learn about other teachers and so on, and I listen to what they say and they're not in alignment with that, I don't feel that that's accurate. And so I won't recommend it. And that can seem a little fanatical, but we have to remember, going back to this idea of devotion and your relationships, when you're in a good relationship with someone and there's something you don't get along, like you don't feel the same way, or you don't believe in, do you decide to be unfaithful then because you don't think the same way or you don't believe the same thing? No, you understand that in a relationship, you're not always going to think and believe the same thing, but you're still working towards a common goal. And so you stay true in that regard. Mr. Davis, when he first started studying with Yogananda, Yogananda told him, he said, for the first year, read only my books and read only the books of the masters, the teachers within the lineage. And Mr. Davis was a voracious reader. He loved reading about philosophy and other saints and sages and so on. And he found a book, I don't remember who it was, but he found a book and started reading it secretly. And he was walking by, and Yogananda was there, and Yogananda said, Roy is a spiritual adulterer, right? He didn't mean adulterer in the sense that we think of it, but, English was Yogananda's first language. And he'd found out that Roy was reading another book. And he said, I told you to read only my books so that you would understand where I am coming from. And once you understand where I am coming from, then you can read anything you want, and you'll have the discernment to know whether it's true or whether it's not true. You understand? And so devotion in this regard also brings up the sense of truth, because when you are devoted to a path, to a teaching, to a teacher, and again, you know that that person is actually representing what you're trying to learn, and you trust them, that truth will grow in you. And then you will begin to know from the inside what reality is, like they knew what reality is. So this is where the idea of truth and devotion comes in this regard too. And again, it just boils down to being a good person in all of your activities, being as truthful and as loving as you can be to the best of your ability, remembering that most of us have a storehouse of karmas, which will sometimes make us behave inappropriately. But if you maintain your awareness and you see it when it's happening, the next time you can try a little harder not to engage in it. And eventually you stop. So sometimes you go through experiences where you might not be behaving appropriately, but if you can have the light of Sattva there and you can see how destructive that is, not only to yourself, but to other people, to other family members and so on, how hurtful that is. And if you're practicing ahimsa, the next time you know, I am not doing that. And what happens is that is what burns your karma. It's the realization of the truth of the matter. Okay. The reason I tell you that story, not necessarily to get you into my business and, all my nitty gritty stuff, but a lot of people, when they're on this path, they think they have to be perfect from the very beginning. Right. And it's not that you have to be perfect from the very beginning, just like you're not perfect in relationships from the very beginning. You just have to be devoted to the process of becoming a more perfect person in that experience. Right. Not type A, weird, perfect. I mean, sincere. And being able to feel the truth of things. So anyway, going back to this sutra on faith, I was fortunate in that with Mr. Davis, I was able to be with someone who is rock solid. There was never a situation other than my own stupidity when he failed me in that or misled me in that. Even when I talked about yesterday, the idea of a teacher not knowing everything, and that is a way of expressing truthfulness. It wasn't often, but there were occasionally situations where I'd bring it up to Roy and say, I don't know. And he didn't make any big grand gestures about it. He said, I don't know. It's not my area of expertise. And that in itself was so reassuring because he was being honest, because he was being truthful. And I've been fortunate in the friends that I've had and relationships that I've had where I could have faith in people. And I feel that one of the reasons that I was able to have that faith is because I did my best to be dependable, to be as solid as possible, to be as consistent as possible. Because you are going to attract whatever is within you. And that is why when you begin to practice truthfulness and you're not good at it yet, you, yes, might attract a teacher or two, which is not quite on the up and up. But that's okay. They're resonating at your current state. But if you keep practicing truthfulness, eventually you will be led to sources of guidance which manifest that more readily. After Mr. Davis died, there was a deep sense of something happened after he died that I began to understand things in a very different way. And I can't describe it, but when I read his books or when I read the Holy Science, it was like there was an inner knowing of higher principles and higher realities. And my meditation began to change, which wasn't happening when he was alive. And I realized in that experience that because we had a relationship, because he knew who I was and I knew who he was, that means that I was within his consciousness and he was within my consciousness. So when his body dropped and his consciousness went into something else, probably lighter, brighter, greater, more radiant, a part of me went into that. Kind of follow what I'm getting at here? It's hard to describe. And so in that way, it was beneficial. And of course, life happens. People die, people pass on. But the people that you know, when they move on or transcend and they become part of lightness, that also means a part of you becomes that. And that's why I don't grieve Roy's loss. I miss him. I miss hanging out with him. I miss his body. I miss being able to just be in his presence and so on physically. But there's no sense of loss because he's there, right? He had that relationship with Paramahansa Yogananda. And since Yogananda was a part of his consciousness and I was a part of Roy's consciousness, well, that field, I am a part of Yogananda's consciousness. And so on, back to Sri Yukteswar and Lahiri Mahasai and Mahavatar Babaji, which means anyone that you know who knew Roy you are also a part of that consciousness. You are also more a part of that light. And by living in accord with the yamas and niyamas, by practicing as faithfully as possible, and by being honest with yourself and maintaining a sense of awareness as best you can, you are better able to access that field, right? You're better able to access. And so when you go through an initiation or you say you are part of the lineage, don't think of it like you're joining a weird cult. I mean, you kind of are, but realize that what's happening is you are just simply becoming part of that field of awareness, that field of consciousness, and that stream that stream that flows into the ocean of spirit, right? And then that is what you give your devotion to, because the more you put your attention on that, the more that light flows through your own consciousness, the more tamas falls away, the more rajas falls away, and the more you're able to abide in the states that the yogis describe. And once you have that faith, well, then what comes? Then the word that's described here is virya, which means vigor. And that virya is enthusiasm, right? Many of us don't make progress on our path because we don't have enthusiasm, or we're depressed. And depression and the heaviness and the doubt, here's the thing, that's just tamas. Remember that energy that we talked about? That's just tamas. It means that where you are right now, there's just an abundance of tamas. And so you're more likely to become doubtful or depressed. And how do you fix it? You do whatever it takes to cultivate this sense of faith. You might have to play mind games with yourself. You might have to come to groups like this often, because in groups like this, that energy of truth and whatnot is a little more palpable, you're more sensitive to it. For me, as I mentioned, I don't particularly like big groups. So what I would do is I would just go visit Roy. I just wanted to be in his presence. I would sit with him. And since he was so established in that state, anytime I would be around him, that would shake off some of my tamas, some of my rajas. And I was less likely to want to do things which promoted anxiety or anger or aggression or things of this nature. And I had to keep going back and I had to keep experiencing it. But we have to remember that we don't want to become dependent on groups. We don't want to become dependent on a person. We want to use that experience as like a launching pad, like training wheels, right? So we can eventually ride ourselves without the training wheels. So we experience it. We have a few weeks of more sattva, we lose a little bit. So we go again, we experience it, and eventually it gets stronger and stronger. But eventually what you learn to do is you simply learn to remember what I said, which is, remember, I was a part of Roy's consciousness, he was a part of my consciousness, to Yogananda, to Sri Yukteswar, and so on. I know you know Ishadas, you know Swami Nirvanananda, you may know other people that knew Roy, you may know other people that might have known Yogananda. Anytime you remember that you are part of that consciousness and you can meditate upon it and allow it to be real for you, you will rise out of the rajas and the tamas. And you have to do it enough until you're strong enough that you can just stay up there. And that's what all of these saints and these sages did. This is the purpose of all of their devotion, was to have such sattva that there is no going back to darkness. There's no going back to the heaviness, the inertia, the rajas, the change and the transformation. And that is why you are here. That is a very real and valid experience. You're still, might have a fender bender every now and then. You still might get athlete's foot. Your roof might still leak from time to time, but that's just what's going on in your physical realm of your body, right? That's just what's happening. But as you become more clear and developed inside, you know what you truly are. And you know that all those things are going to pass and change, and you'll get the right ointment, and the roofer will come, and the car will get fixed, and so on. So that is what we're doing. And then when this is the culmination of the whole thing. And then when that becomes stable for you, when it comes time to leave this world, when your karmas are exhausted and you're done, you don't have any need for a body anymore, you don't have any need for the relationships that you have, you will be so established in that when it comes time to drop the body just falls away and you remain in that state of lightness. And if there's another realm, higher realm for you to experience, astral, causal, or so on, you'll just flow into it. And the issue is you will remain as aware there as you are here right now. Because what most people do is they just go through their life doing their stupid shit all the time, and they die. And they're like, oh, what's this? A dream. Okay, now I'm back in a body again. It's like there's a brief flash. There's a brief flash of, oh, I see. That's when people go through near-death experiences, even if they're not profoundly spiritual. They see the light, they feel the love, they feel the awareness, but because their consciousness hasn't burned away all the original sins that draw them back to this world, they have to come back to a body until all those things are gone. Whereas if you get an individual who's practiced their Kriya Pranayama, done their Jyoti Mudra, knows how to flow through the tunnel of light, knows how to stay present in the astral and the causal realms in deep sleep, then when the body drops away, they are as here, or they are as there as they are here. And that's it. And then if they need more spiritual practice in a subtler realm, they just continue it there. They don't have to come back with the athlete's feet and the leaking roofs, and all that kind of stuff. Then they've got to deal with other things, better things. So the whole purpose, your life, this is the purpose of your life. That's what it boils down to. And when you bring more devotion and love into your life, it makes it much easier for you to stay in that state, to persist, to flow into a state of clarity, a state of pure awareness, and stay there no matter what happens. And if you can do it while you're asleep, if you can do it while you're stuck in sleep paralysis, if you can do it while you're sick, then when the body falls away, you can do it then too, and you're free. Roy was asked one time, what can I do to be enlightened the moment that I die? And he said, all I know is that in order to be enlightened when you die is to be enlightened before you go. All right. And as I mentioned with the question that was asked to me in Ireland, wasn't there a shortcut? This is the shortcut. This is the shortcut. And it might take all your life. But as long as you are consistent, it doesn't even matter if you succeed in the way you think it's supposed to look like. So you think that succeeding looks like a certain way. Right? So let's imagine you're aiming for that. Even if you fail to achieve what you think success looks like, the fact that you kept on going for the duration of your life, you're still going to succeed. The body will fall away, you'll pop back, like, okay, that's great. So the trick is not necessarily attaining your specific idea of what it looks like. The trick is to, moment by moment, just do what you know is appropriate right now to perpetuate that momentum, which might mean that for the next hour, you're not going to tell a lie. That might be all there is. For tomorrow morning, you're going to get up and you're going to meditate. For you're going to decide that maybe next week, you're not going to eat any chicken. Whatever it is that you're working on these yamas and niyamas while you continue to cultivate your inner experience through meditation. You just do that. You wake up in the morning and you admit to yourself, I did my best yesterday. I'm going to do my best today. And if you have any weird little psychological quirks going on, go see a psychologist and get them out of there. And it might take a while, but you need to do that in order to persist in what you're doing to be successful. And as I mentioned, if you just keep doing that, you'll be fine. There was one I guess they called them nuns in SRF. I know there were monks and nuns, but there was one nun that Yogananda, she was dying, and he went to see her when she was dying, and she was concerned because she hadn't had any miraculous spiritual experiences, nothing really. Babaji didn't come to her, and she'd been a devotee her whole life. And he told her, he said, you've done exactly what you need to do. Just relax. It'll be all right. And that's an example of don't worry about what you think it's supposed to be like. Just do what you know needs to be done. And at the end of it all, you'll be free. If you're not free already, you might be free ahead of time, but that devotion, that dedication. And the idea for me of devotion is consistent attention to detail, consistent learning, consistent love for what you're supposed to be doing, and trying to live with integrity and truth. And you do that not just for your spiritual practices, but in all of your relationships, every single one. Like I said, I treat Jasmine with the same respect and love that I treated Mr. Davis. I treat my friends with the same respect and love that I treat Jasmine and Mr. Davis. My students, I feel the same respect and love for them as all these people. Even with family members I don't get along with. I don't approve of their behavior, but inside, I still feel that. And I would still do my best for them, put in a situation. And you know when you have how do you know when you have devotion, love for something? When you will serve them no matter what. I don't mean you will serve them if they abuse you. I mean, no matter what situation they get into, you don't say, oh, well, I'll be in this relationship so long as, they're healthy. Or I'll be in this relationship so long as, their mental health is perfect. I'll be in this relationship so long as this, that, or the other. You decide, I am with them no matter what they're going to go through. And you know when you're on the right path, when you're devoted to the right thing, when the question never arises in your mind to leave. And I try to treat everyone in my life that way. And the people that I'm not devoted to, I'm very clear about, because I can't be devoted to them. Maybe we don't have the karma. Maybe they're not behaving in a certain way that I can really participate in my life. I can't be in that field with them. And I'm honest about that. So devotion is also being very clear about your boundaries. In Vedic astrology, and we'll take some questions here. In Vedic astrology, there's a chart called the Navamsha, the D9, which is said to be the chart. In Indian astrology, it's interpreted as the chart for marriage. So you look at that chart for one's marriage life. But really, that's the chart of what you are devoted to and how well you will be devoted to things in your life. And so if I want... With the Kriya Yoga Apprenticeship Program, I take people's astrological information just so I can look at their chart. And so I can look at it and I can see, should I really expect this person to be devoted? Or are they just here for a few years, they want to learn a few things and they'll go off on their own path because they get distracted or whatever. And so I look at that to have a realistic understanding, is this person actually have the capacity for devotion? And I say that because a lot of people who don't have the capacity for devotion. They go here, they go there, they've been married 20 times, they can't ever find the right partner, the job's always difficult. It's like no matter what, there's always something that's preventing them from committing, right? Well, with the Navamsha, when someone's devoted when the planetary influences are pointing in one direction, meaning there's a confluence of energy going in this one particular direction. They're not necessarily going to be so devoted when energy is going here and here and here and here and here. They're scattered. And we have to remember part of the purpose of yoga is to bring your scatteredness into focus. And so remember, you're going to go a lot further if your choices are this narrow. Because if your choices are this narrow, you can only go up, right? If your choices are this wide, you can go from here all the way over to here and not make 1 inch of movement upwards, right? So within the process of yoga and your devotion, narrow it down. Narrow down what you do. Narrow down what you read. Narrow down what you practice. Stop doing all kinds of things and narrow down your life to where you are focusing on the essentials. And when you're focused on the essentials, you'll be successful and you'll be devoted and you'll experience bhakti, essentially. Okay, so let's take some questions. If you have a question, raise your hand.